Right, good afternoon, colleagues, delegates. We now have a quorum, so we'll begin. But if more parties are arriving, please take your seats and insert your voting cards. And I have an announcement to make. Being asked that when you leave for lunch, you all take your voting cards with you. I think it's been noted that a lot of voting cards have been left in the microphone slot, and that's an invitation perhaps for them to go missing or to be lost. So once the session closes, then please take your voting cards away with you and keep them safe, of course. So yesterday we created two working groups, in fact, and we said we'd provide details of the terms of reference and some suggested chairs. So I'm sorry we weren't able to announce those earlier today, but the working group on document 64, or item 64, on marine turtles, Chelonidae and Dermochelidae species. The terms of reference will read as follows. The working group on marine turtles, Chelonidae species and Dermochelidae species shall A. Revise the draft resolution in CoP19 Doc 64.2 as amended by the Secretariat, taking into account the comments and interventions made in Committee 1, and B. Consider and revise, as necessary, the renewal of Decision 18.217, Rev CoP19, and the draft decision proposed by Samoa. And we have been looking for someone to chair that, and the European Union kindly offered or indicated their willingness to do so. So I thank the European Union for that. And then continuing with our second working group that we created yesterday, on item 87.2, aquatic species listed in the CITES appendices, proposals for a new approach to the listing of sharks and rays. The mandate, or terms of reference, shall be the working group on aquatic species listed in the CITES appendices, proposals for a new approach to the listing of sharks and rays shall consider and revise, as necessary, the proposed draft decisions by Senegal for a process to enable consideration of the possible need for the review of Resolution Conference 924, Rev CoP17, and its footnote on the application of decline for commercially exploited aquatic species with regards to the class Chondrichthyes, if I can pronounce that. Again, we've been looking for a chair, and the United Kingdom kindly indicated their willingness to do that. So we're grateful for United Kingdom for that. We will post details of the working groups and when they'll be meeting will be posted on the COP19 website as soon as rooms are allocated. And we will also try and make an announcement at the start of each session about relevant working groups too. So that brings those two items up to date. And right, okay, we just lost our quorum while I'm speaking, so maybe that says what you think of me speaking, but if parties could please make sure, we need one more party to insert their card into the microphone slot so that we can actually continue with the session. We're a quorum, and we have a quorum again, so we can continue. So colleagues, just before I start with the next agenda item. Just a reminder that we started the day 2 agenda items behind. We're now 4 agenda items behind our schedule. So, I will, repeat my request to you that to keep your interventions short, to focus on amending or to focus on the issues that the COP is being asked to decide, and only intervene if you desperately need to. If somebody else has made your point, you can refer to a previous intervention and make yours shorter. So we do need to try and catch up some time, if we can. However, the next item on our agenda is item 70 with document CoP19, Doc 70, and I invite the chair of the Plants Committee to introduce this, I think. So if the floor could be given to Gabon. Okay. We'll just give you a moment. I see you maybe just got here. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. President.
Chair, at its 18th meeting, the Conference of the Parties adopted decisions 18.234 to 18.237 on rosewood tree species, directed to the Secretariat, the parties, the Plants Committee and the Standing Committee. At its 25th meeting, the Plans Committee agreed to submit draft decisions to the 19th session of the Conference of the Parties in order to continue the work on rosewood tree species. These draft decisions contained in Annex 1 of document CoP19 Doc 70 are as follows. Directed to the Secretariat, 19 AA. Subject to external resources, the Secretariat, little a, in consultation with the Plants Committee, developed the objectives of the proposed study of rosewood tree species, taking into account the findings and recommendations contained in documents PC25 Doc 26.1, PC25 Doc 26.2, and PC25 Doc 26.3. Commission a study on the conservation of and trade in the identified rosewood tree species, taking into account the priorities, conclusions, and recommendations contained in documents PC25 Doc 26.1, PC25 Doc 26.2, and PC25 Doc 26.3. Little c, report on the progress of the study to the Plans Committee. Little d, taking into account the above, organize an international workshop inviting relevant range states, trading countries, relevant organizations, industry representatives, and other experts to present and discuss the results and prepare recommendations. And little e, submits the final study to the Plans Committee for review along with the results of the workshop if it has been held. Directed to the Plans Committee, Decision 19BB. The Plans Committee shall review all progress reported by the Secretariat on the implementation of Decision 19AA, work with the Secretariat to develop study objectives, and make recommendations to the Standing Committee and the Conference of the Parties as appropriate. Directed to parties, 19CC decision. Parties are invited to collaborate with the Secretariat and the Plans Committee in the implementation of decisions 19AA and 19BB and to support the work of the study and the international workshop, including seeking external resources from relevant organizations and stakeholders. Directed to the Standing Committee, Decision 19DD, the Standing Committee shall a, consider any reports relating to the implementation of decisions 19AA to 19CC. B, identify any implementation and enforcement issues associated with international trade in rosewood tree species, in particular those identified as a priority by the Plants Committee, and C, make recommendations to the Conference of the Parties as appropriate. Thank you.
For comments by parties, and I ask you in particular to focus on the draft decisions in Annex 1. So the floor is open. Right, thank you. I now have the European Union to speak first, followed by the United States, and then Senegal. So, EU, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We support the draft decisions as agreed by the Plants Committee and most of the edits by the Secretariat. We fully recommend their considerations to CoP19. We're extremely concerned about the sharply increasing trade and trade shifts in rosewood species and legume timbers that are not currently included within the CITES appendices. We're also fully committed to enforcing and ensuring a legal and sustainable trade in those rosewood species which are included, and note that despite CITES efforts, a pervasive illegal trade still exists for many rosewood species. So we support the draft decisions and most of the edits of the Secretariat, and we just would seek clarification on, directed to the Standing Committee, 19CC, whether paragraph little b there should comment from the Secretariat whether they really want to strike out that issue on implementation and enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, EU. I'll just capture some more comments and we can come back to that. So, United States, followed by Senegal.
Thank you, Chair. It sounds like we might align ourselves with the previous delegate, and we do support the draft decisions of the Plants Committee, including most of the amendments by the Secretariat regarding draft decision 19AA, while we would prefer for the Plants Committee to provide input on the study prior to its use at an NDF workshop. We can accept deletion of the subparagraph C, but would ask that it be noted in the summary record of this meeting that the Technical Advisory Group for the International Experts Workshop should consider whether the study is appropriate to include on the agenda at that meeting. To this decision, we would also add a new subparagraph A, recognizing that additional information has been generated in relation to CITES-listed tree species that may be referred to as rosewood. As such, we recommend a new draft decision that would precede the suite of decisions directing the Secretariat to compile an updated list of activities as follows. And I apologize, we did not submit this in advance. So it would be new subparagraph A, compile and submit for consideration of the Plants Committee information, an overview and status of work completed, underway, or to be undertaken as a result of CoP19 to improve CITES implementation for rosewood tree species. So I think that might be a little awkward, but the idea is that the information that's been brought forward to date as of this meeting would be important to have in mind. Okay, shall I repeat it or?
Yes, please.
Okay. Compile and submit for consideration of the Plants Committee information, an overview and status of work completed, underway, or to be undertaken as a result of CoP19 to improve CITES implementation for rosewood tree species. And perhaps it should be on the agenda at CoP19. I see now it looks a little awkward, and I apologize. The remaining paragraphs would be renumbered accordingly. And then regarding the new draft decision 19CC, we support the amendments to paragraph A and the deletion of paragraph B, as well as the amendments to what were previous subparagraphs C, and which is now B. But we recommend a further addition to this subparagraph as follows. So the subparagraph B would say, make recommendations with the Secretariat's edits aimed at improving the implementation. We would add the words, comma, interpretation, comma, and enforcement of the Convention for Rosewood Tree Species, as et cetera, as it's shown in the document. So we would just add the words interpretation and enforcement to that subparagraph. We also support the deletion of the previous decisions 18.234 to 18.237. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, United States. Just making sure we've captured exactly what you were intending. I now give the floor to Senegal, followed by United Kingdom. Senegal.
Voilà, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. As the parties who have spoken before Senegal, we align in favor of this proposal. On rosewood tree species, but I would like to recall that for the sub-region of West Africa, the most visible species is Pterocarpus erinaceus, and currently there is a decision, a notification, which suspends trade for this species. Therefore, there are certain issues with this species, but the stockpiles that have been constituted before the entering into force of this notification, there is a stockpile of this wood for certain countries who do not have the capacity to absorb these quantities nationally. Therefore, it would be ideal that the Plants Committee discuss this issue that is a very important one, because countries depend on it. And it would be important that this be discussed. As for the international workshop, that's a very good initiative that we should put in place, so there is a better understanding and appreciation of the situation of the rosewood tree species. Internationally speaking, Senegal, in any case, is not an exporting country for rosewood tree species. It's a species that is fully protected, but Senegal is the author of the listing of these species in the CITES appendix, because Senegal is very attached to the conservation of this species, which has a high value for our ecosystem and contributes to our nation, and therefore its conservation is crucial. And if we want to trade with these species, we'll have to do it sustainably. Another issue is with regard to the non-detrimental findings. Our countries have to carry any of these NDFs, but as you know, we have very limited resources. And in this regard, we would like to invite the Secretariat to visit these countries and see how they lack those resources that allow them to put in place NDFs. There is huge potential in the region, but we will need to assist these states to see how they can exploit those resources that have to help the national economies. Thank you.
Thank you, Senegal. We'll now take United Kingdom, then Guatemala.
Thank you, Chair. The UK supports the draft decisions, the continuation of this work, and the international workshop as proposed by the Secretariat in their comments. The UK agrees that it would be beneficial to combine the proposed workshop in this document with that proposed in Doc 43.1 on non-detriment findings. If this was to happen, the UK suggests that an agenda is drafted to establish clear outcomes that support the desired outcomes for both rosewood timber species and non-detriment findings. Given the substantive changes proposed, the UK would like to suggest an in-session document be produced to allow us to consider this proposal fully. Thank you.
Thank you, UK. I now give the floor to Guatemala.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Guatemala supports the recommendations by the Secretariat for this draft decision proposed by the Plans Committee, and would like to mention here that this species, this tree species, such a large species, needs of a more specific intervention, taking into account that many subgenre have not been listed in CITES, and following many studies that have been carried out, and which Guatemala also studied the non-listed species. It's important that we start to work on the characterization of these other subspecies, and that we know are of high importance to many countries. We very much agree that we set up an international workshop of experts, and we will contribute as best we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guatemala, and that concludes the list of parties asking for the floor. I'll give observers a chance to make any interventions if they wish. I don't see any, so with that, we'll just check that we've got the right changes, and then I'll come back to you in a second. So thank you, colleagues. We've just been looking at the changes, making sure that we got everything together. We note the request from the UK to have a ComDoc that people can see everything down in black and white, and you can then judge if you're happy with the various amendments going forward. So we will do that as the next course of action, and you can then review it. We heard quite a lot of support, of course, for the draft decisions, plus amendments from the Secretariat, and of course, various revisions suggested. And I also heard support for the deletion of the previous decisions, 18.234 and to 18.237. So we agree that those should be deleted. So we will come back with the ComDoc, and you can then examine the changes in greater depth. Okay, thank you, colleagues. We will now move on to agenda item 79. CoP19, document 79 on African tree species. And again, I would invite the chair of the Plants Committee to introduce the document, and so technicians could give the floor to Gabon, please.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. At its 18th meeting, the Conference of the Parties adopted directed to the Plants Committee Decision 17302 on African tree species and Decisions 17302 relative to 18260, for African cherry, on progress made on the implementation of the decisions 18302 and 18260. On the basis of the recommendations of this working group, the Plants Committee has prepared draft decisions and invites the parties to adopt them. These draft decisions are in Annex 1 of our document. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair of the Plants Committee, for that introduction, and referring, of course, to the draft decisions in Annex 1. So with that, I open the floor for any comments from parties. I don't see any. So in that case, I spoke too soon. United States, you have the floor, followed by Eritrea.
Thank you, Chair. The United States applauds this work to support the sustainable use and management of African tree species, and appreciates the progress made in the previous intersession, including discussions of the Plants Committee Working Group on African tree species, informative outcomes emanating from the CITES Tree Species Program Regional Meeting for Africa, and the Secretariat's compilation of information in support of implementing the decisions. We support the draft decisions of the Plants Committee contained in Annex 1 to document CoP19.79 on African tree species, and would recommend an amendment to Decision 19AA, paragraph B, to simply add the phrase, "and other relevant information," and I'll tell you where that would go. In the paragraph B, it reads, based on documents, and then it lists 3 Plants Committee documents. We would add a comma and the words "and other relevant information," comma, and then continue on with the paragraph as it reads. We do not support the recommendation to delete subparagraph A, which was a little unclear actually, and I apologize, I didn't follow up with the Secretariat to see if that was the intention in Decision 19AA. There's no strike through on the text, but the renumbering in the ensuing paragraphs suggested that that was a recommendation to delete the paragraph. And in what is written in the document in the Secretariat's comments is paragraph, currently reading paragraph A, but original paragraph B. We do have 2 proposed amendments. We support the first amendment to include recommendations for sustainable management, but we do not support the second amendment, which would unnecessarily limit the Plants Committee's efforts. Sorry. As such, we would not support the amendments to that paragraph. And with regard to the amendments proposed to paragraph D to 19AA and draft decision 19CC, we do not support these changes, which would require all of the Plants Committee reporting and recommendations to go through the Standing Committee. It is fully within the Scientific Committee purview to make recommendations as appropriate directly to the Conference of the Parties. In closing, we recognize that a decision is not needed to allow the Plants Committee to strike a working group, but we hope that the good work of this group will continue in the next intersession in support of the range countries and importing countries. We also support deletion of decisions 17.302 on African tree species and decisions 18.260 to 18.262 on African cherry, Prunus africana. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, United States. I think we've got your comments there. So Eritrea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. Since it's the first time Eritrea is taking the floor, I wish to express our thanks and appreciation to the people and government of Panama for hosting CITES CoP19 in such a wonderful setting. Moreover, we congratulate you on your election to the chair of this committee and wish you all the best for your endeavors. We commend that the Plants Committee for preparing Doc 79 on African tree species. Moreover, we support the draft decisions presented under Annex 1 of CoP19 Doc 79. We like to emphasize, however, that adequate time is given in updating the list so far collected, believing that this task will demand more time and consultation. Thank you, sir, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Eritrea. That concludes the list of parties asking for the floor. I will see if there are any observers that may wish to make an intervention. No. Okay, I will conclude in a moment. Just 1 second. Right, thank you, United States and parties for your comments. We're just checking that we have everything correct. So looking at the Secretariat comments, I think the 19AA, which appears as though it might have been deleted, is going to be retained in what should now be paragraph B. We would have a reference to adding any other relevant information after the various Plants Committee documents. I think United States, the text at the end, as contained in these documents, we would delete. And in 19AA-D, as it would be now, would retain the language at the end and the Conference of the Parties as appropriate. Is that your revisions correctly summarized? And of course, you also agreed to deletion of decisions 17302 and 18260 to 262. Is that correctly captured? Yes. Okay. So with that, I think we can close this document and move on. And we now move on to document CoP19, document 81, which is on neotropical tree species. Again, I would call on the chair of the Plants Committee to introduce this, and if we could give the floor now to Gabon. Thank you.
Monsieur,
Thank you, Chair. At its 18th meeting, the Conference of the Parties adopted, directed to the Plants Committee, Decision 18299 on neotropical tree species. This mandated the Plants Committee to re-establish the intersessional neotropical tree species working group to work by electronic means, to agree on a priority list of CITES listed neotropical tree species, and report on progress made with priority neotropical tree species, and to put into place the implementation of traceability and ensure the sustainability of these trees, and to prepare training and identification material based on different existing methods. So based on the recommendations made by the working group, the Plants Committee has drafted some draft decisions. They can be found in Annex 1 of document 81. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair of the Plants Committee. And with that, I open this document for comments on the draft decisions contained in Annex 1 of the document. And I see Guatemala on my screen, so you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. We would like, as a delegation of Guatemala, to thank the region for such effective participation, for the range states, for the great contributions made to the processes that the working group has been implementing for some time. Guatemala agrees with the draft decisions that are set out in Annex 1 of the document, and we just have one comment for draft decision 19CC, which in the Spanish version says invites parties to collaborate, but it should say directed to the Secretariat, because this is a decision which is for the Secretariat. I think maybe the English version has the correct version.
Thank you, Guatemala. If there's a problem maybe with the text in terms of how it's been translated, or perhaps a phrase has been repeated or placed in the wrong place, but I think we can check on that and make sure that the Spanish and English versions are compatible. But thank you for bringing that to our attention. I have the United States now requesting the floor. So.
Thank you, Chair. The United States supports adoption of the draft decisions in Annex 1 to document CoP19 Doc 81, with an addition to draft decision 19.AA that in updating the list of neotropical tree species, the Plants Committee should also consider the outcomes of CoP19. The United States agrees with the Secretariat's recommendation that decision 18.299 can be deleted as it has been carried forward in the new proposed draft decisions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United States. So you would simply add at the end of paragraph 19AA, take into consideration the recommendations included in document PC 25.9 addenda and the outcome of CoP19. Yes? Perfect, thank you. I don't see any parties requesting the floor, so I would invite any comments from observers. And if there are none, then with that very minor amendment by the US, we will adopt as a recommendation from this committee the draft decisions contained in Annex 1, and we will also delete decision 18299. Yeah, and there's no other decisions that need deleting, so I think with that we can close document 81 and move on to document CoP19, Doc 82 on medicinal and aromatic plant species. And again, I turn to the chair of the Plants Committee to introduce the document, and if we can give the floor to Gabon, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. At its 18th meeting, the Conference of the Party adopted decisions 18.300 to 18.303 on trade in medicinal and aromatic plant species, and 18.302 was addressed to the Plants Committee. We established a working group which allowed us to see the progress made on the decision mentioned above, and which takes into account the medicinal and aromatic plants listed in CITES appendices, and which is in the COP18 Inf 11 document, which lists the measures which potentially can improve the follow-up of trade and reports on medicinal and aromatic plants. On the basis of the recommendations of the working group, the Plants Committee prepared draft decisions and invites the Conference of the Parties to adopt them. These draft decisions are addressed to the Secretariat, are directed to the Plants Committee and to the Standing Committee, and they can be found in Annex 1 of document COP19, Doc 82. Before concluding, I would like to mention the information documents COP19 Inf 31 submitted by the Secretariat, and the document COP19 Inf 32 submitted by the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, United Kingdom. The document Inf 31 provides a list of medicinal aromatic plants currently listed in appendices 1, 2, and 3 of CITES. And the aim of document COP Inf 32 is to inform parties on the database Medicinal Plant Name Services, which is referenced in the draft decisions on medicinal aromatic plants. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair of the Plants Committee, for that introduction and additional information. So I now draw your attention to the draft decisions in Annex 1 and invite comments from parties on these. So the floor is open, and I see the United States, followed by China and the European Union. So US, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The United States supports a continuation of this work to the next intersession, prioritizing those activities that have a CITES nexus, including topics in the planned second non-detriment findings workshop. We support some, but not all, of the Secretariat's amendments to the draft decisions, and I'd like to briefly tell you the ones that we do not support. First of all, we do not support the revisions to draft decision 19AA that would delete the direction to liaise with the Plants Committee, especially in the chapeau to the decision. Regarding revised draft decision 19CC, we do not support the amendments to paragraph A to delete the direction for the Plants Committee to inform the study in decision 19AA, nor the amendment to paragraph C, which would not allow the Plants Committee to submit recommendations to the Conference of the Parties if it deems it appropriate. We firmly believe that the technical experts in the Plants Committee should inform efforts under these decisions in consultation with the parties in their region, especially as it relates to a study and the use of medicinal plant name service. We also reiterate that the Plants Committee is not required to pass all recommendations through the Standing Committee. We will welcome the opportunity to review the use of the Q medicinal plant name service, but we remain cautiously skeptical of using such a database. We reiterate that the Species Plus database is not the official CITES species checklist. While having access to the pharmaceutical trade names associated with CITES-listed species may have its utility, we are skeptical of how this information would be used and the implications of using an external database. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. I think we've got your comments there. I now give the floor to China, followed by the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. As written in paragraph 8 of document 82 and recorded at the 25th meeting of the Plants Committee, we naturally insist that the amendment to the draft decisions proposed by the alternate representative of Asia be adopted. With regard to the revisions to draft decisions, paragraph A of 90CC proposed by the Secretariat, which relates to any changes to the standard nomenclature reference or the checklist of CITES, we request that this work be moved to the standard nomenclature and led by our nomenclature specialist. Dear Chair, for the sake of simplicity, I suggest that you establish a draft working group with the participation of China and consolidate the task with the assistance of the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, China. And I give the floor now to the European Union.
Thanks for the floor, Chair. I speak for the EU and its 27 member states. The EU generally supports the draft decisions, but would like to suggest one small amendment to draft decision 19CC small b, which Germany has already proposed in Plants Committee 25. The suggested amendment was not accepted by the Plants Committee due to concerns of parties that more time is needed to consider the amendment. So Germany was invited to submit the suggestion to CoP19, which is reflected in paragraph 8 of the current document. In the end of draft decision 19CC small b, the Plants Committee is meant to prepare recommendations for a revised resolution on traditional medicines or a new resolution on plant-based medicinal products. Regarding the potential new resolution, the EU thinks that a restriction to medicinal products is too limited and would not take into account that many products containing medicinal and aromatic plants are not medicinal products in a strict sense, but would rather be considered cosmetics, personal care products, food supplements, and so on. We think that this has also been the general understanding of the Plants Committee Working Group and the analysis of the Secretariat that have been provided in documents PC 25 Doc 30 and COP18 Inf 11, so that this larger scope should then be taken into account when considering any potential new resolution about plant-based products. We would therefore like to propose the following amendment. In decision 19CC small b, in the last line, deletion of the term plant-based medicinal products and replacement with the term medicinal and aromatic plants products. The last line of decision 19CC small b would then read, resolution on traditional medicines or a new resolution on medicinal and aromatic plants products. Thank you.
Thank you. European Union, I don't have any more requests from parties. Again, I'll invite observers to intervene if they wish. All right, I do have Cameroon want to take the floor, so Cameroon, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Cameroon welcomes the draft decisions given the potential for medicinal plants. In Cameroon, we support this decision and hope that efforts will be made to assist countries in capacity building, in particular in the drawing up of standards and techniques for the production and multiplication of these species. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameroon. I've had opened the floor to observers, and I see Traffic. So, Traffic, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. This intervention is on behalf of Traffic and the IUCN Medicinal Plant Specialist Group. We welcome draft decisions included in Annex 1 of Document 82. CITES provides an important form of regulation of international trade in medicinal and aromatic plants, with over 800 of these species listed in Appendix 2. While these species are representative of varied taxonomic groups, there are distinctive common features of their trade that warrant continued consideration as a group within CITES. We support the intervention of the European Union regarding the inclusion of term and aromatic in any further resolutions. We would like to draw the attention of parties to a range of specialized tools for medicinal and aromatic plants trade, developed specifically to support CITES implementation. This includes the Fair Wild Standard and the 9-step guidance on NDFs for perennial plants. A recent joint FAO, IUCN and Traffic report, Wild Check, assessing the risks and opportunities of trade in wild plant ingredients, and the accompanying platform at wildcheck.org could support the implementation of the proposed draft decisions 19AAA and 19BBA. The platform aims to enhance awareness of value chains, of CITES regulations and trade interventions, and encourages sustainable use and legal trade in medicinal and aromatic plants. We call on parties and other stakeholders to join this collaborative platform. A side event held today in Caribbean 5 at 5:15 p.m. will provide an opportunity for parties to exchange experiences around the solutions to ensure sustainable trade in medicinal and aromatic plants, and we welcome everyone to join. Finally, we stand ready to support the implementation of the draft decisions, including to potentially undertake the in-depth analysis of e-commerce value chains in products of CITES-listed medicinal and aromatic plants, should the draft decision be adopted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Traffic. And if you just give me a moment to check I've got everything correctly, all the amendments correctly in the document here, and then I will sum up. Thank you. So we have, all the amendments that have been proposed from the floor. But I think, China, you suggested you wanted a working group and implied you have a lot more sort of changes to make. Could you give us a feel for those the changes and text you want?
I believe we have that changes in the PC summary record, PC 25 summary record. There has been recorded in the summary record. So it's quite substantive, so it would be better to have the chance to consolidate this text, also including the, the CITES comments and the US comments. Would that be a very small working group? Thank you.
Okay, sorry, United States, you want the floor?
Apologies for requesting the floor again. I wonder if it wouldn't be possible for us to include a direction for the Plants Committee to have those discussions in the next intersession so that we can better inform how this work can be done. I know that a lot of times discretion is given to the Plants Committee to shape how we'll look at subjects. Thank you.
Yes, I think United States there are, ways of doing that. I think probably the best way, rather than trying to resolve that, I believe the comments in the summary record from the Plants Committee are quite considerable, and therefore can't really be debated in this kind of forum constructively. So maybe I think I would suggest a small drafting group to consist of the United States, EU, China, and traffic as the key people who have had an interest here. See if you can come up with a way forward with these draft decisions that would take account of China's comments and maybe find a way for the Plants Committee to be able to deal with these issues before CoP20. So if parties are content with that, I'll ask those three parties and traffic to go away and try and come back with a revised set of decisions that takes account of the summary record from the Plants Committee, but also what we've been discussing here today, and including the Secretariat comments, which people who have spoken have largely kind of accepted, with some changes, I know, not entirely. So, and clearly, whilst we're going to have this drafting group, then we're not in a position to delete the previous decisions yet until we adopt any revised decisions. So, I think we'll leave it at that, and we will arrange something or somewhere for the drafting group to meet. Okay? Yes, thank you. Okay. So with that, we can conclude discussions on, for now, on document 82. And we're now sort of catching up with our agenda for this afternoon, and this takes us, if you let me sort my papers out, into item 84 on maintenance of the appendices and standard nomenclature, and document 84.1. So with that, it's going to be introduced by the nomenclature specialist from the Plants and Animals Committee, and I believe the Plants Committee nomenclature specialist is going to introduce this. So can we now give the floor to Delegate 704. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We wish to start by thanking the Government of Panama for hosting and organizing this meeting, and the Panamanian people for the warm welcome we have received ever since touching down at the airport. We congratulate you on your election as chair of this committee and apologize in advance that introducing our document will take more than 3 minutes. CoP19, document 84.1, presents the Animals and Plant Committee's report on standard nomenclature. I will present the section on flora nomenclature, which covers paragraphs 6 to 16, and will then hand over to my colleague from the Animals Committee to cover fauna issues, as well as the matter relating to the nomenclature of Appendix 3 listings, which concern both flora and fauna. Document 84.1 annexes that are relevant to the flora are Annex 1, containing new or revised draft decisions, Annex 2, an update to the Annex to Resolution Conf 12.11, which formulates updates to list of standard nomenclature references for flora, and Annex 4 is the impact on the appendices of the flora nomenclature recommendations. Now to the core report. Paragraphs 6 to 9 summarizes the decisions and work plan relating to flora nomenclature that was adopted at COP18, as well as the documents discussed during PC25. Paragraphs 10 to 14 summarizes the recommendations of the Plants Committee as follows. Concerning the genus Aloe, the Plants Committee recommended that an updated standard reference for aloe species need to be prepared. It is recommended that the decisions 19A1 to 19A2, as outlined in Annex 1, be adopted by this meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The annex to document PC25 COM5 contains a list of aloe names treated as synonyms in the new alloid genera and additional revisions that was identified. It is recommended that in the interim, this document be included as a supplementary reference for the aloes in the standard nomenclature references in Resolution Conf 12.11 as outlined in Annex 2. And parties are further reminded that all Lumatophyllum names are scientific synonyms of CITES listed aloe species and are thus regulated under the Convention. Concerning the genus Pachypodium, in the past, the CITES checklists for the genera Aloe and Pachypodium were combined in the same document. The Plants Committee recommended that a separate, updated standard reference for Pachypodium need to be prepared. It is recommended that decisions 19B1 to 19B2, as outlined in Annex 1, be adopted by this meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Concerning Cactaceae, COP18 adopted a series of decisions to monitor the use and impact of the third edition of the CITES Cactaceae checklist and its supplement. Based on this feedback, the Plants Committee agreed that the preparation of a fourth edition of the CITES Cactaceae checklist should be a low priority. It is recommended that this meeting of the Conference of the Parties adopt the extension of the amended decisions 18.304 to 18.306 as outlined in Annex 1. Following the inclusion of Asticium valdesi in the synonymy of the Appendix 1 listed Asticium ritteri in the supplement to the Cactaceae checklist, and in the absence of a proposal to formally list Asticium valdesi in Appendix 1, it is recommended that Asticium valdesi be reinstated as a separate species and restored to Appendix 2, and that Marcia et al. 2013 be adopted as a standard nomenclature reference for this species as outlined in Annex 2. Concerning Diospyros species populations of Madagascar, the Plants Committee agreed that work towards an updated standard reference for Diospyros species of Madagascar be continued, and that, in the interim, a new time-stamped download from Vascular Plants of Madagascar be made available. I would like to make use of this opportunity to thank the editors of the Vascular Plants of Madagascar database for their commitment towards the work of CITES and for their efforts in making this new time-stamped version available in time for its proposal as a standard reference. It is recommended that decisions 19C1 to 19C2, as outlined in Annex 1, be adopted by this meeting of the Conference of the Parties, and that the new time-stamped download from Vascular Plants of Madagascar be adopted as the new standard nomenclature reference. Further on this matter, an amendment to the text in the third column of Annex 2 was requested in order to clarify the taxa covered in the proposed standard reference. It is thus recommended that the existing text, Diospyros species, populations of Madagascar, be expanded to read Diospyros species, populations of Madagascar, and then in brackets, large tree species. And this is outlined in addendum to CoP19 Doc 84.1, corrigenda to an Annex 2. Concerning Orchidaceae, a new standard nomenclature reference for Appendix 2 listed orchids was produced. And I would like to make use of this opportunity to thank the editors and contributors to this checklist for their hard work and dedication to get this publication ready. Further on this matter, an amendment to the text in the third column of Annex 2 has been reflected in the addendum to CoP19 Doc 84.1, corrigenda to Annex 2, in order to clarify the taxa covered in the standard reference. So it is thus recommended that the existing text, Orchidaceae, Appendix 2 listed orchids, be followed by the list of genera in brackets that are covered in this reference as it appears on the front page of the checklist document. It is recommended that decisions 19D1 to 19D2, as outlined in Annex 1, be adopted by this meeting of the Conference of the Parties, and that the new CITES Appendix 2 orchid checklist be adopted as the new standard nomenclature reference, as outlined in addendum to CoP19 Doc 84.1, corrigenda to Annex 2. Concerning taxus species, the Plants Committee agreed to retain the standard nomenclature reference as currently reflected in Resolution Conf 12.11, while the possibility of producing an updated standard reference is investigated. It is recommended that decisions 19E1 and 19E2, as outlined in Annex 1, be adopted by this meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Concerning Gibbertia species, the Plants Committee agreed that a standard reference is required for Gibbertia pellegriniana and that amendments to reflect the correct synonymy and distributions of this species is required. It is recommended that Leonard 1949 be adopted as the standard nomenclature reference for Gibbertia pellegriniana as outlined in Annex 2, and that amendments and corrections pertaining to the synonymy and distribution of the species is approved as set out in paragraph N and Appendix 4 of the current document. Concerning Dalbergia species, CoP18 adopted a series of decisions to undertake the development of an annotated CITES checklist of Dalbergia species. A first version of such a checklist is proposed as the new standard reference for Dalbergia species. The Plants Committee also noted that further work towards the annotated checklist will be needed following CoP19. I would like to thank the editors and contributors to this checklist for their continued hard work and dedication, and congratulate them for producing an excellent publication. It is recommended that the CITES Dalbergia checklist be adopted as the new standard nomenclature reference as outlined in Annex 2, and that the proposed extension and revisions of decisions 18.307 and 18.308 as set out in Annex 1 be adopted by this meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Concerning the proposed work plan for the next intersession, apart from the work emanating from the decisions in Annex 1 for the provision of new and/or updated standard references for taxa currently listed on the appendices, or for those listed at COP19, the following aspects were identified as part of the proposed flora nomenclature work plan: the correct name of Diptrix oleifera, the classification of the genus Bulnesia and the correct name of Bulnesia sarmientoi, the correct treatment and placement on the appendices of the hybrid Turbinicarpus rosaifloris, and the consideration of the enforcement-related implications of updates of standard nomenclature references for flora species listed in the appendices. So to summarize, the key recommendations relating to flora are that the Conference of the Parties agree to the draft decisions 19A to 19E and the extension and proposed amendments to decisions 18.304 to 18.306 and decisions 18.307 to 18.308 as presented in Annex 1. The Conference of the Parties is also asked to adopt the proposed revisions to the Annex of Resolution Conf 12.11 relating to flora as included in Annex 2, including the proposed amendments to clarify the scope of the references for Diospyros species populations of Madagascar and the Appendix 2 listed orchids, as outlined in the addendum to document CoP19 Doc 84.1, Corrigenda to Annex 2. So that concludes the flora section of the report, and I will now hand over to my colleague from the Animals Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Nomenclature Specialist of the Plants Committee, and thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to present nomenclatural matters concerning animals. Document 84.1, from paragraph 17 onwards, summarizes the nomenclature work done in the Animals Committee at its 31st meeting, which was held online, as well as intersessional work with the Secretariat and parties. In paragraphs 18 to 21, it is explained how the Animals Committee recommends adoption of a new standard reference for birds, but was unable to fully assess the implications of that choice for the presentation of species in the appendices. It is therefore proposed to adopt a decision to continue this work in order to make a clear and comprehensive recommendation to the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. With regard to the topic of using time-specific versions of online databases as standard nomenclature references, progress is reported in paragraphs 22 to 25, and progress concerning nomenclatural and identification of corals is noted in paragraphs 26 to 28. These complex activities have continued in close collaboration with the Secretariat, and a set of draft decisions to further this work can be found in paragraph H of the comments by the Secretariat on pages 13 and 14. With regard to decision 18.315, directed to the Animals Committee concerning the listing of pangolins in the appendices, this evolved into a wider consideration of higher taxon listings in the appendices, which is summarized in paragraphs 29 to 33. As a result, a new decision directed to both the Animals and Plants Committees to review this further was drafted and can be found in paragraph 33. Concerning the ongoing work of updating the list of standard nomenclature references in the annex of Resolution 12.11 on standard nomenclature, paragraph 34 summarizes the preparation of new checklists for species included in the appendices at CoP18, and paragraph 35 notes that Annex 3 of the present document lists additional nomenclatural references recommended for adoption. Annex 5 in turn lists the implications of these proposed adoptions for the appendices and for the use of species names in other CITES documentation. Paragraphs 38 to 40 describe two cases where CITES listed species were taxonomically split in a standard reference that was adopted at COP16, that is, split compared to the original listing and nomenclature standards, with the result that part of the originally listed species was not properly recognized in the appendices by the name of the split of species. This concerns a subspecies of the Kulan, Equus hemionus luteus, which needs to be explicitly acknowledged in Appendix 1, as well as Maxwell's duiker from West Africa, Philantomba maxwelli, to be explicitly noted in Appendix 2. Also, the growing scientific acceptance of two species of African elephants and its potential implications on CITES are noted in paragraph 41, which proposes a number of draft decisions directed to the Animals Committee, the Secretariat, and a Standing Committee to review and evaluate this complex subject with the view of providing clear recommendations to COP20. Paragraph 44 notes an initiative to develop a standardized global checklist of plant and animal species and its potential relevance to CITES and other multilateral environmental agreements. And in paragraph M, the Secretariat proposes a decision to enable the nomenclature specialists of the Animals and Plants Committees to engage in this process. Concerning the nomenclature of species listed in Appendix 3, paragraphs 45 to 48 summarize the deliberations on this matter, on which the views of the Standing Committee were sought. This led to a series of draft revisions to decisions 18.313 and 18.314, which can be found in Annex 1 to the present document. And finally, in the course of preparations and document review by the parties, a small number of additions and corrections have been brought to our attention. And these are noted in some detail in the addendum document that was made available on Monday and referred to by my botanical colleague. We thank our colleagues for drawing our attention to these matters, and we thank the Secretariat for their assistance processing these improvements. These concern some spelling corrections of scientific names, the addition of Paragalago grantii and Brachypelma smithi to the list of species defined by new nomenclatural standard references, because these had accidentally been overlooked in Annex 3 of the main document, despite their inclusion in Annex 5. Also, we propose deletion of Psittacara ex intermedia from the 2014 Del Hoyo and Collar reference, so that the adopted reference, Collar 1997, remains in force for this taxon. And it involves adding the applicable reference from 2017 for two Europlatus gecko species that were erroneously assigned to a 2015 reference. In summary, we concur with the Secretariat's recommendations as listed in paragraph O on page 15 of the present document, with the clarification that decisions 18.313 and 314 not be deleted, but replaced by the proposed revised version. We thank the Secretariat and all party, intergovernmental organization and non-governmental organization persons who provided extensive input on all nomenclature matters over the years since CoP18. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, nomenclature specialists of both the Plants and Animals committees. And I'm very impressed that you were able to summarize. This is a very long and complex document that reflects an awful lot of work, and I'm very impressed that you were able to condense all that into such a succinct summary. So I'm very grateful to you both, and I'm sure the parties as a whole are very grateful for all your work in undertaking what is a very critical part of the work of this convention. So we've had this introduction. Parties have had a chance to consider the document. We'll try and do this in a way that gives you, or looks at this in sort of bite-sized chunks. So what we suggest is that we begin by looking at the draft revisions to the standard nomenclature references in Conference Resolution 1211. And in particular, we will begin with those proposed for flora in Annex 2 of document 84.1, including, of course, the corrections which are shown in the addendum to document 84.1. So with that focus, I will invite any comments from parties. And I will take silence as a consent that you're all happy. This has been a very thorough piece of work. I see the United States. Yes?
Our card doesn't seem to be working. He just fixed it for us. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, yeah, I can see on my screen now. It didn't initially, and your microphone is lit up. So
yes. So
okay.
fine. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. Yes, we would like to start by saying that we applaud the efforts of the nomenclature specialists for flora and fauna for your leadership in bringing forward this very large program of work during this past intersession, given all of the challenges we faced. We also appreciate the work of the respective Animals and Plants Committee working groups who informed these issues, with the capable support of the Secretariat. And we would like to, I guess we kind of had our intervention ready to take the whole shebang, but I'll go with just flora. So we support the recommendations outlined in this document, along with the draft decisions in Annex 1, and the amendment to Resolution Comp 1211 as found in Annex 2 for flora. We also support the recommendations in the addendum to the document. We support the recommendations or comments made by the Secretariat with two exceptions, but one is for fauna, so if you want me to hold that, I will. Thank you. With respect to the amendments to the Dalbergia, with respect to the Dalbergia checklist, we'd like to suggest actually moving this in a different direction. And in fact, I apologize, but if I could possibly give the microphone to our colleagues in the United Kingdom, I've got a bit flustered by the joint presentation of the documents, and I think our colleagues had an intervention to make on this regard. Thank you.
Oh, I can certainly do that, but I see your microphone is lit up, so can we give the floor to the United Kingdom? That they're not actually appearing on my screen. So, UK, have you got? Yes, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and to the US for their comments. So the United Kingdom supports the draft decisions in Annex 1 and the revisions by the CITES Secretariat, along with the revisions presented in Annex 2. Regarding the additional work identified by the Secretariat for the genus Dalbergia, noting page 13, paragraph D, point C and D, on the development and incorporation of wood identification features to the annotated checklist species profiles and the development of molecular tools for species-level identification of wood specimens of Dalbergia. We recognize this work is urgently needed, and we believe this aspect of Dalbergia work could continue under the identification of timber and other wood products work program. The reason we request this separation of nomenclature checklists and timber identification is to make implementation guides available to parties as soon as they are available, and not to be delayed awaiting formal adoption of standard nomenclature references at Conference of Parties. However, we hope that there remains close collaboration between the production of nomenclature checklists and identification tools. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, UK. We were just checking here what changes that would actually make to draft decisions, and we think it doesn't require a change to the decisions, but it's something that we ought to note in the summary record so that that work can be taken forward on issues relating to timber or wood identification, and not just as an issue of standard nomenclature. So paragraph in comments from the Secretariat, paragraphs D, C, and D. So we'll make a record of that, and does that actually capture your point, UK or US, or did you want some changes in the actual decision? Is your microphone not working, or no? Okay, UK.
Thank you. The UK is happy with this way forward.
Okay, thank you for that. United States, did you want to speak, or you got the floor?
Sorry, yes. Sorry, I apologize. We did have a suggestion for a draft decision that could actually refer some work to the Timber ID Working Group, or to the work under timber identification. And as such, we would propose a new draft decision be considered under the agenda item CoP19 Doc 44.2 on identification of timber and other wood products. And for the ease of dealing with it under this document, with the idea that we'll discuss it, we could discuss it again under the other one, we would just call it new paragraph X, to prioritize input in the development of identification material for Dalbergia species, taking into consideration progress made in document PC 25, Doc 34, and the Dalbergia checklist as included in Resolution Conf 1211, Rev CoP19, comma, and giving attention to frontline identification materials to assist differentiating look-alike species that may not be of conservation concern. So we think that this would be a good way to help loop in that other group that has been focused on timber identification. And that was actually the amendment that we wished to make for flora. We do have a comment on an item that spans fauna and flora, but we could wait if you prefer. Thank you.
So I think what we'll do with your draft new paragraph or a decision, it's linked to document 44.2. So I think if you give us the text for that draft decision now, we can include that in the summary record, and then when we get to document 44.2, then we have got the text there and we can makes it simpler to introduce at that stage. Yes? Okay, thank you. I see the European Union requesting the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And first, I'd like to speak on behalf of the EU and its member states, and we'd like to thank the nomenclature specialists for their leadership in addressing this large amount of work accomplished in the intersessional period. I suppose speaking to the flora items online, maybe are we discussing the work plan as well? Or were you just discussing the...
Well, I'd originally suggested we were just discussing Annex 2, but we seem to have expanded a little.
Okay, so if you're happy...
If you could just keep comments to Annex 2 now, and then I'll maybe come back to the draft decisions later.
Okay, so just on the way forward, on that new draft decision and way forward suggested by the UK and the US, we could support that. Thank you.
I see Ethiopia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As this is the first time Ethiopia takes floor in this Committee 1, we also join other parties and observers in extending our appreciation to the warm welcoming and hospitality of the people and the government of Panama. And also we congratulate you on your leadership as a chair of the Committee 1. Ethiopia wants to intervene for draft decision 19 ANS directed to the Animal Committee, Part A, to include...
Well, hold on, Ethiopia. You've got a decision related to the Animals Committee. I was going to come on to animals in a moment, so we could just try and wrap up. We're just trying to focus on Annex 2 on plants, flora at the moment. So when we come on to the animals and all the decisions, I'll make sure I give you the floor and take your intervention then. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So just trying to focus. I've not seen any comments or dissent in relation to Annex 2, including the amendments from the addendum document. Are there any observers who wish to comment on that? But I think if not, then we can take it that we are content with the changes in Annex 2. Annex... Oh, right, so talking Annex. Flora. Yeah. So we're talking about Annex 2 on flora, and I've not seen any dissent, so I think we can adopt that with all the changes. I'm now going to ask you to focus on the relevant annex for fauna, which I think is Annex 3, if I've got my papers correctly done. Yes? Yeah. Annex 3. So I open the floor for any comments on Annex 3, recognizing also that there are corrections which are contained within the addendum document as well. So the floor is open if there are any comments. And silence I will take as consent. United States.
Thank you, Chair. So with regard to Annex 3 and its addendum, we have just one observation, which is that there was the topic of a hybrid, which is referred to in the addendum as Citicula X intermedia, and it was our understanding that further discussion of that issue would occur in the next intersession because it turned out to be a little more complex than it seemed. So I would ask the nomenclature specialist for fauna to please clarify that. And then when the opportunity arises, we do have comments on the document as well. Thank you.
So does nomenclature, yeah, we could give the floor to the nomenclature specialist for fauna.
Thank you, Chair. I can reassure the United States that we have removed this particular species by way of the changes made in the addendum document, which means that the current standard reference for the species will remain in effect. So there's no change for the time being, and this will be taken up at the 32nd meeting of the Animals Committee and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you for that reassurance, nomenclature specialist for fauna. Are there any other comments on Annex 3? I don't see any, so I think we can agree that that is adopted with the corrections and amendments in the addendum document. So moving on from that, I will now suggest we look at the draft decisions which are in Annex 1. And I know some of you already kind of have some suggestions. And perhaps Ethiopia, as I interrupted you when you were about to start on your intervention, perhaps you could take the floor now. So Ethiopia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So Ethiopia recommends with regard to draft decision 19 Annex 5, directed to the Animal Committee, Part A, to include the IUCN Special Survival Commission African Elephant Specialist Group as a primary stakeholder to be consulted for expert inputs and opinion during the implementation of the decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ethiopia, we understand your intent, but could you be more specific about exactly where you would insert this reference? So we're talking about decision 19A and 4, and obviously there are 4 parts to that. So if you could tell us precisely where you would want your text to go, that would be helpful. Thank you. AN5, I beg your pardon.
So we just suggested this change so that the IUCN application of the best available science and the data to this question is incorporated. So we are just recommending under Part A, the IUCN and the Special Survival Commissions, the African Elephant Special Group, to be added as a primary stakeholder for consultation. Thank
you. Thank you, Ethiopia. I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong decision there. So maybe what we can suggest to capture your wording is the Animals Committee shall, in paragraph A, in consultation with the IUCN African Elephant Specialist Group, review the taxonomic nomenclature history of African elephant. Would that capture your intent?
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Okay. Thank you. Ethiopia. I'll just make sure I've got a note of that. Right, so we are looking at all the decisions in Annex 1. Are there any other comments from parties, or I see none? Any from observers? See the screen's flickering around a bit. So I see the United States, and then IUCN, I also see you too. You have the floor. No?
Thank you, Chair. I apologize, but I just wasn't clear if you were closing discussion of the document or just that one annex. Thank you. Then I'll wait. Apologies.
I now have the European Union, then, well, IUCN are on my list because I'd opened the floor to observers, but I will take parties first, of course. So European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the European Union and its member states, I would like to say under Annex 1, with regard to standard nomenclature for Appendix 3 species, in the outlining work plan on page 5 of the document, we note that the investigation of the nomenclature for the taxon Diptrix panamensis, which is currently listed in Appendix 3, is proposed for inclusion in the work plan for the next intersessional period in paragraph 16, page 5 of the document. But we consider that this may need to be resolved as a matter of urgency should proposal CoP19, proposal 48, to include Diptrix species in Appendix 2 be adopted, as the nomenclature in the proposal does not recognize this taxon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, EU. That is a change which is obviously dependent upon a listing proposal, and perhaps that's something that can be considered when we actually get to that proposal, and and would be addressed, would it not, by document 84.2, rather than needing something inserted here? So are you content with that? There is document 84.2, so EU, you have the floor.
Yes, sorry, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just once it's dealt with, and we highlight that to you. Thank you.
Helps if I put the microphone on. So we note that comment, and clearly we will get on to that document and the listing proposal, hopefully in the near future. So I now see IUCN. So IUCN, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for giving us this opportunity to comment on document 84.1. On behalf of the IUCN, we suggest the following additions to the proposed decision 19AN4 that is directed to the Secretariat. So in Part A, add, and in particular, parties that are African elephant range states. And in Part C, add, summarize patterns apparent in the responses of parties that are African elephant range states. And also in Part C, add, and collate, review, and summarize apparent benefits and drawbacks with respect to CITES' aim to ensure that international trade in specimens of wild animals does not threaten the survival of the species when considering the existence of two African elephant species. We suggest these changes to ensure that African elephant range states' perspectives are given appropriate attention and weight, considering that potential impacts, whether positive for species-specific conservation or management purposes, or burdensome in terms of legislative, regulatory, administrative, or enforcement impacts, will likely be experienced by them to a greater degree than other parties. We also suggest these changes with the hope that the long-term positive impacts are identified, included, and not overshadowed in the Secretariat's review by shorter-term administrative burdens that may occur if CITES were to recognize 2 African elephant species in the future. The IUCN is available to support the work of parties who have a need to confirm elephant species identification at sites within their borders, and to provide other technical support relating to issues they may experience when preparing for a potential future situation in which CITES recognizes 2 African elephant species. Thank you.
Thank you, IUCN. I may need to ask you to repeat those suggested amendments again, but it would be useful to hear if those are supported by parties, or if parties have any view on the suggested changes. I don't see any requests for the floor, so without some support from parties, I can't really sort of propose those as a way forward, I'm afraid. Right. And I don't see any more requests for the floor at all, so I think Annex 1. I see one other observer requesting the floor, so Traffic, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Chair. We would strongly support developing recommendations by the Secretariat to renew Decision 18309 and 18310 on the use of time-specific online databases as standard nomenclature references. We would like to highlight the need to maintain time-stamped versions that include both listed and unlisted species, as this can be important when understanding the implications of taxonomic changes and intentions of listing proposals at the time they were adopted. These became relevant when looking at the proposal to list the Agalignis lemur, Proposal 35. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Traffic. Just give me a moment, please. Right, so just to conclude, we've been through Annex 2 and Annex 3 and have adopted those already. We have been through the draft decisions, and with some minor amendments, we have adopted those as a recommendation. The nomenclature specialists in the introduction supported the inclusion of Secretariat's recommendations in paragraph O, of the document, which is on page 15 of the English version. And we've just heard from Traffic about their views on retaining decisions on, or renewing decisions on the use of time-specific versions of online databases. So I ask the views of parties whether there are any further comments or support for Secretariat recommendations in paragraph O. So I open the floor. And I see United States. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I hope this is in paragraph O. First of all, I would say that we do support the continuation of the time-stamped version decisions, which I thought was a part of the recommendations of the document, but just in case, we do support that. And with regard to the recommendations of the Secretariat, I suppose we have just one comment as it relates to the first workshop on governance of taxonomic lists. So we would support a revision to this decision because we understand that it's important for the Animals and Plants Committee to stay apprised of this work, to understand how it may or may not impact or be of value to CITES. But we're not certain that there will be a value and benefit, and so we'd like to add just a subparagraph to allow contemplation of that matter within the committees. And so we would add to the draft amendment 19AA. I'm sorry, again, we normally do provide our interventions in advance, and I apologize. I think we would have to, we'd have to create a subparagraph A and it would say, subject to external funding, the Animals and Plants Committee shall, through their respective specialists, and then it would be subparagraph I, and I'd be, like I said, I'll be happy to provide this and we can fix that. Participate in the initiative, it would stay the same, of the International Union of Biological Sciences to develop a standardized global, and I would underline the word checklist that was missing from, I think, the decision, of species. Little double I would be the new language, report progress on such participation at each of the meetings of the committees, and Roman numeral 3, draft a report for the committee consideration at its final intersessional meeting, providing views on the prospective value and benefit and the potential limitations of participating in such effort as it relates to improving CITES implementation, taking into consideration the specific aspects of Resolution Conf 1211, particularly paragraphs 2, 3, and especially 3B, 7, 8, among others. And then we would continue with little b, report on progress to the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties as appropriate. So I'd be happy to repeat that. Thank you.
Yeah, so in discussion here, one of the things that we're commenting on is that this decision is directed to the Animals and Plants Committee, and therefore you're asking the Animals and Plants Committee to kind of report to themselves. So it perhaps seems a little circular, but do you still feel it is necessary, essential?
So I think the issue is that it says through the respective chairs, and we do just want to make sure that it comes back to the committees for consideration and input before anything is submitted for further reference. So if we can note for the record that we think that the committees do need to inform any recommendations or reports submitted to the Conference of the Parties, then that would be fine with us. And then I would just mention, if I may, that on the work plan, while it's not required for the committee or for the parties to endorse or approve the specialist work plan, we do appreciate the advanced development of such. We would note, and we do agree with the Secretariat's observation, that additional issues may be referred to them after this meeting, but we would also like to note that additional matters may be brought forward during the intersession, which may be incorporated into the work plan as per Res Conf 1211, paragraph 3. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, United States, and thank you for your flexibility, and certainly we can kind of note those in the summary record so that they're available for the chairs and committees, respective committees, to take into account. So just one moment while I check where I am with this range of recommendations. I think we're nearly there. Okay, so I think we're nearly there. I think we just need to record for the record that you did insert the word checklist into Decision 19AA, United States, and that will be incorporated. But otherwise, the draft Decision 19AA in paragraph M, we would leave as is with your note for the summary record. Looking at the remainder of paragraph O, there hasn't been any comment on the nomenclature and identification of corals and the suggestion to retain those. I can take your silence as consent if you're willing to do that. So unless I hear an objection, we will roll those forward. And then finally, I think the final things we need to do on this particular agenda item are to delete decisions 17.312, 18.315, and I think that is it, yes. So unless there's further comments, I think we can close this agenda item. And again, I would thank you all for your input to this, and again, thank the nomenclature specialists of both committees for the enormous amount of work that goes into this task. So thank you very much. So I'll just check on time. So continuing with our agenda, we will now shift into a different agenda item and begin our consideration of proposals for the amendment of the appendices. And in the working program, the first proposal that comes up is Proposal 48, which in summary is to include Diptrix species in Appendix 2 with an annotation. But I won't go into the details of the proposal. The proponents are Colombia, the European Union, and Panama. And I would invite one of those to introduce the proposal in full. So with Proposal 48, I see Panama requesting the floor, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, and once again, welcome to Panama. On behalf of the proponent countries, Colombia, Panama, and the European Union, we would like to introduce Proposal 48, Diptrix species, Kumaru, a new annotation including logs, sawn wood, veneer sheets, plywood, transformed wood, and seeds, including the species Diptrix lata, Diptrix honorata, and Diptrix prolifera in the Appendix 2 of CITES in conformity with Article 2 of the Convention. This species apply criteria B of Annex 2 of Resolution Conf 924 Reb CoP19 to include the rest of the Diptrix species which for their similarities include criteria A of Annex 2B of Resolution Conf 924 Rev CoP17. Diptrix is a complex taxa that includes a number of species that are distributed in Central and South America. Big tree species emerging and slow-growing trees. The genera is being exploited for a strong and dense and resistant wood. Is being commercialized with Kumaru, Chihuahuacu, Jarapilla, amongst others. The Diptrix species can be found in dry forest, tropical forest, savanna, mountain forest, as well as ancient forest of the Amazon basin. Forest trade, Bolivia has exported 3.5 million kilos of Kumaru to the EU in 2019. The Diptrix genera represented 80% of all the exports of wood from Peru in 2015. In international trade between 2018 and 2021, the United States and the European Union have imported 11 million kilograms and around 7 kilograms of Kumaru wood from Brazil, and Peru exported between 2018 and 2021 more than 82 million kilograms and 51 million kilograms only for China, 19 kilograms to the European Union, and 1.8 to the US. Colombia exported between 2019, 2020, and 2021 343 cubic meters of several species of Diptrix, most of them to Vietnam. The major importers are the US, the European Union, China, and Vietnam. There is an illicit trade of Diptrix. For example, in 2021, Forest Trends considered that all wood species of native forest of Brazil, Colombia, and Peru, including Diptrix, are under the high risk of illegal exploitation. Global Witness in 2019 said that 70% of the inspected wood between 2008 and 2018 by the supervising authority for wild forest in Peru were illegally collected. Brazil, Colombia, and Peru are huge exporters of Diptrix wood. The Diptrix species are facing deforestation, selective extraction, international trade, degraded habitat in all of their international distribution area, and that trade has a direct impact on wild species and the losing of Diptrix species. Diptrix alata has been valued and included as a vulnerable species in IUCN list in 2017 on the basis of the important coverage due to a loss of habitat and other genetic issues, as well as wood logging. It has been considered that the Diptrix odorata and Diptrix licrata are also losing ground because they are facing huge threats. Diptrix odorata and Diptrix micranta have been considered high risk as highly threatened species due to the logging and deforestation in Peru and Bolivia. Their role is extremely important for the dynamic equilibrium within the ecosystems because they are very important feeding systems for numerous insects and other animals. They are also nesting areas for animals facing extinctions, and Diptrix also have a very important role to fight climate change thanks to their capacity for carbon transformation. Estimate delegates, we really hope that we can count on you for the protection of this very important species in tropical forests in order to manage a legal and traceable trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Panama, for your introduction. So I now open the floor for comments from parties, and I see Brazil, followed by Colombia, then Suriname. So Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving us the floor. The proposal now under consideration by this committee raises serious concerns for Brazil as the country with the largest population of the genus Diptrix. From the outset, it's worth highlighting that Brazil has maintained the firm commitment to implementing CITES through decisions based on updated scientific studies and not on allegations and conjectures based on insufficient data. However, when we look at Proposal 48, it is our understanding that robust scientific data justifying the submission of the species to the protective regime under CITES Appendix 2 is absent. The lack of sufficient data has been noted by the Secretariat, who recognized that, and I quote, little specific information is available on the status of the species purported to satisfy criterion B of Annex 2A of Resolution Conf 9.24 Rev CoP19, end quote. In the same way, the International Timber Trade Organization pointed out that, and I quote again, more justification for the genus level listing to include all species beyond the 4 target species should be provided, including country experiences in identifying different species in the genus. It's clear, therefore, that there are still many doubts and data gaps in the proposal. Moreover, the insufficient scientific information does not allow concluding that the genus is or may be threatened with extinction. And it could not be different since in Brazil, and allow me to say it again, the country with the biggest population of Diptrix, the most recent studies and analysis carried out by renowned institutions like the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation, Embrapa, did not find any current risk for the populations that are commercially exploited in the country. This is even more evident when we observe that the last update of our official list of species, and the Brazilian official list of species of flora threatened with extinction, carried out in June of the current year, did not include any species of this genus. Therefore, in our view, the approval of Proposal 48 would imply the loosening of the criteria for inclusion of species in the appendices of CITES, weakening the mechanisms for implementing the Convention's goals. Consequently, it would also set a dangerous precedent for the Convention, harming all parties who could face undue and scientifically unfounded restrictions on their international trade. Mr. Chairman, there's another fundamental reason indicating that the proposal does not meet the criteria for inclusion on Appendix 2. Trade is not contributing to the decline of Diptrix population, quite the opposite. In Brazil, virtually all production of timber intended for foreign markets comes from sustainable exploitation practices, perfectly aligned with the concept of the sustainable use of biodiversity. It is possible to assure, in volumetric terms, that 87% of timber production in Brazil comes from sustainable forest management plans. When it comes to Diptrix, the figures show that 95% of the production of timber comes from sustainable forest management plans approved and inspected by the Brazilian government. The implementation of sustainable management plans only allows for the extraction of specific trees with the conservation of about 88% of all existing trees in the area being explored. Therefore, this does not involve removing the forest or any other type of changing soil use that could compromise the survival of existing species. On the contrary, the various management categories constitute important tools for maintaining the standing forest, in addition to providing countless possibilities for conservation and sustainable use. Thus, the inclusion in Appendix 2 of species proven not to be endangered in the Brazilian territory may render the implementation of sustainable forest management less attractive. This, in turn, could cause the abandon of forest areas, which may be converted to other types of use that could constitute a threat to the survival of flora species, including those mentioned in Proposal 48. The proposal then would have the strict opposite effect to that desired, bringing about risk for the species that it intends to protect. We should not ignore the fact that sustainable management practices are essential to ensure the livelihood of traditional peoples who inhabit the forest, decisively contributing to the perpetuation of their traditional knowledge. This is the case, for instance, with the collection of Diptrix seeds, or tonka beans, an activity that is manually carried out up until the export stage by indigenous peoples and local communities living in the areas where they occur. Therefore, should the Proposal 48 be approved by this Conference of the Parties, there would be significant social and economic harm, especially to vulnerable and needy populations, what would be fully inconsistent with the policy of engaging indigenous peoples and local communities in CITES implementation processes, as suggested in document 13. Another important aspect to be mentioned is that the information control and management systems for the tropical wood production chain in Brazil can be considered to be among the most comprehensive and robust in the world, ensuring that the entire authorization process is digital, with clear characterization of the exploration project and traceable controls for manufacture and domestic and international trade. The CINAFOR platform, under the coordination, supervision, and regulation of the Brazilian CITES Management Authority, IBAMA, is a completely digital licensing process that can be audited at all stages of the production and trading chain for forest products. Based on these mechanisms, the Brazilian authorities are able to supervise in an extremely effective way the sustainability of almost all exported wood cargo loads, with a broad vision of the entire chain of custody, including origin, manufacture, and commercialization. Moreover, IBAMA is well equipped to identify these species through macroscopic laboratory tests, using the interactive wood identification key, a tool that was developed in partnership with the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization to strengthen CITES implementation in the region. Finally, we must take into account the impact that the approval of such proposal would have on the activities of our CITES authorities. We can anticipate, in this case, a significant increase in demands on Brazil's bureaucratic structure that would divert efforts and resources otherwise focused on species that are effectively under some threat of extinction. Brazil is aware that the sustainable management of forest resources, including Diptrix, may not be the reality in all countries where the genus occurs. Our country is ready to share its experience and good practices in this regard. We are also open to develop further studies in collaboration with other ranger states that could provide solid scientific data on the status of this species. We cannot admit, however, that our model of sustainable use of natural resources be penalized by the adoption of unjustified restrictions to our trade. For all these reasons, we invite parties to oppose this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. So on the list, I do note I've got Colombia and the European Union on the list, and I will give you the floor. But we already had a fairly long introduction to the proposal from Panama. So for now, I'll just give the floor to some other parties that we've not heard from just now. So I'll give the floor to Suriname, followed by Bolivia, and then Peru, and come back to Colombia and the European Union later. So Suriname, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Since this is the first time Suriname is taking the stage, I want to congratulate you on your election for this committee. And I want to also thank Panama for having us in this great event. Since 1947, the Diptrix adorata is a protected tree species in Suriname. The justification of this protection is based on the use of the seeds of this species. The seeds and as well the extraction from the seeds are being used for traditional, cultural, and medical means. There is an important export market of products obtained from these seeds to Surinamese and diaspora living abroad. Because of this reason, we are suggesting to withdraw the seeds from the proposal, otherwise it will bring a lot of administrative burden to the common citizens of our country. We are thanking you for taking the position of Suriname into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Suriname. So I'll give the floor to Bolivia, then Peru, and then Colombia.
Muchas gracias. Primeramente.
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank the Panama government and the CITES for welcoming us in Panama and for the good organization of this meeting. Bolivia would like to say that we do not agree with the amendment with inclusion. One, because there is no scientific base and does not reflect the way this species is being managed in the plurinational state of Bolivia. Bolivia would like to say that we support the conservation of forests through our authority. We have more than 10 million of hectares of forest in our country. Most of them have been supervised by the FCC certificate. Of those 10 million, more than 6 million are under the administration of 85,000 families of ancestral populations, and these the economic value of these forests would be lost if they cannot trade with Diptrix odorata, which is the biggest value of this forest. And for this reason, we would like to request that it not be included or listed the Diptrix odorata in this appendix. Several Bolivian studies which have a good scientific basis. I have heard that there's not enough information, but Bolivia has enough of information through its 1996 legislation. We have two national inventories that have covered more than 6 million hectares, and the results show that Diptrix odorata has no problems. There are no issues with its behavior, coverage, or which is why we wouldn't like to see it listed in the appendix as long as we don't have the technical information, the technical data that will allow us to take a responsible and informed decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Bolivia. I'll now give the floor to Peru, followed by Colombia and the European Union. Peru.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Peru, as a very diverse country, is fully committed to forest conservation and the promotion of the sustainable use of its resources, taking biological diversity as an opportunity and an asset for sustainable development in the benefit of local populations. They are the main allies for conservation. To date, according to genetic diversity studies that have been conducted by the Peruvian Amazon Research Institute, 3 species of Diptrix species have been recorded. Diptrix micrantha in the areas of Madre de Dios, Ucayali, and San Martin, Diptrix feria in the areas of Loreto, Ucayali, and Madre de Dios, and Diptrix charapilla in the area of Loreto. All these species are well as known as Chihuahuaco or charapilla. This group of species, this general species, are difficult to differentiate at the anatomical level, and they are the species that are most used by the forestry industry and the most important in terms of volume and value of their exports, which have seen an increase in recent years. It is important to point out that in the national categorization process of species and that is underway, the natural populations of the Diptrix micrantha species are in a position of vulnerability or minor concern in IUCN criteria, considering the reduction of the area of occupation and extension, as well as with regards to national densities observed in the national inventories and data for commercial use that we have. We would also like to share that there are new population reserves in areas under conservation schemes, such as the natural areas that are protected by the state, FSC certified forests, as well as forest management areas that are being supervised by subnational forest authorities and the Forest and Wildlife Resources Supervisory Agency. Given the probable listing of the Diptrix genus in the Appendix 2 of the CITES, it would require the Peruvian state, according to the forestry and wildlife legislation, to require the CITES Management Authority to carry out an ocular field verification of the declared trees prior to the approval of the forest management plan and the issuance of a non-detriment finding by the CITES scientific authority, which would also imply a field evaluation of the populations. In addition, the authority will have to evaluate as well the resources that would, the deployment of the resources, personal, logistical, and budgetary resources that would be necessary to carry out a verification of the harvest history area. It should be noted that the listing of timber forest species in the CITES appendices in recent years often do not take into account the challenges that parties face, and a reasonable timeframe for the entry into force would be therefore very necessary. This should also be linked to technical and financial support projects to ensure mobilization of resources to strengthen the work of the parties. Therefore, if the listing be approved, we recommend the proponents to consider an entry into force in a period of 24 months to allow the parties the adoption of the necessary measures and actions. Regarding the annotation, we would like to support the recommendation made by Suriname, and we would like to suggest that seas not be considered as part of the annotation, given that their trade is not significant for all species and could discourage integrated management in forest ecosystems, limiting livelihoods of local communities and populations. It will also be important to count on the support of the international cooperation to ensure mobilization of resources to close the gaps in scientific aspects such as population studies and identification tools, and to carry out the measures necessary to strengthen traceability and monitoring of management plans, reinforcing all practices for a sustainable use. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peru. And I think you have introduced there two substantive amendments, haven't you? You're proposing that there is a 24-month delay if this proposal was adopted, and you're also formally proposing the removal of seeds from the annotation, which would then make it compatible with annotation 17, if I remember correctly. And that, of course, would narrow the scope or reduce the scope of the proposal, so it is admissible, and clearly we can allow that into the debate. So I only have two other parties requesting the floor. So Colombia and the European Union, who are both proponents, perhaps in your... Oh, there's a third. Oh, right. We've got a third blank row again. Oh. Right. So we've got the United Kingdom, but there's a row which, if the technicians can look at it, is showing up, but without any name in it. So continuing, giving the opportunity to non-proponents to speak before coming back to co-proponents. I will give the floor to the United Kingdom, but it would help if we could also resolve this blank row. So UK, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We thank Colombia, the European Union and its member states and Panama for this proposal. We recognise several species of Diptrix are in trade, and there is evidence that Diptrix alata meets criterion B of Annex 2A of Res Conf 9.24. Due to the uncertainty of similarity of species and timber identification, the genus appears to meet the criterion A of Annex 2B. However, we consider that there is insufficient evidence to support the harvesting and trade of tonka beans is negatively impacting Diptrix species. This includes a lack of scientific research into the impacts of current seed harvesting practices upon the regeneration of wild populations, while initiatives based on seed collection that reportedly encourage the sustainable management of Diptrix populations could also be more fully evaluated. Therefore, the United Kingdom supports this genus listing, but requests that it go forward without the inclusion of seeds under annotation 17, as suggested by Suriname. We have heard the suggestion by Peru to delay the implementation of this listing by 24 months, but the UK does not support a delay of this length. We do not consider that this would be in the interests of the conservation of Diptrix and may create an incentive to harvest large amounts of Diptrix from the wild in order to create pre-convention stockpiles. Therefore, the UK supports the inclusion of Diptrix in Appendix 2 with annotation 17 within the usual 90-day implementation window. Thank you.
Thank you, UK. I'll give the floor to Senegal, and then I will genuinely come to Colombia and the European Union. So Senegal, you have the floor.
Voilà, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. We are pleased to see these proposals and to learn about them. They invite the follow-up of the harvesting and trade in Diptrix. We think that it is not a restriction, it just allows us to ensure that we follow the resource in export and to put into place parameters that control the follow-up of the species in the wild state. So we support the proposal, but we also invite everyone to take into account annotation 17, which looks at other uses. Thank you.
Thank you, Senegal. I give the floor to Colombia, followed by the European Union.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Colombia, as a proponent country, would like to thank you for giving us the floor so that we can contribute to the analysis of a group of species such as Diptrix, as it's the first time that a proposal for an entire species has been put forward to include in Appendix 2 of CITES. There already have been precedent for inclusion in Appendix 3. The information based on the intrinsic characteristics of vulnerability and the information that is documented on the increase in harvesting and trade in the species, as is the case in Colombia for Diptrix. This means that we meet the criteria set out in Resolution 9.24 for enlisting in the appendix, which means that we must move forward in its management and propose its listing in Appendix 2. We'd like to thank our co-proponents, and this represents all the authorities, as Peru mentioned, the administrative and scientific authorities from the point of view of capacity building and the creation of information so that we can have a legal, sustainable and traceable use. And we understand there would be a deadline for the putting into force. We continue to invite all parties to consider supporting the proposal for listing of the Diptrix species as a next step towards sustainable use. Thank you.
Thank you. Colombia, I give the floor to the European Union. So you have the floor, and as a co-proponent, you might also want to reflect on the debate that you've heard here today. EU?
Thank you, Chair. This intervention is on behalf of the European Union and its member states. We thank Panama for the excellent introduction of this proposal and together with Colombia for the excellent collaboration on it. There is no need, I think, to stress that we are convinced that the listing criteria are met. Maybe I will not reiterate everything. Instead, I try to respond to some of the reactions we have heard from parties here, and I'm very thankful for this. We believe that Diptrix timbers are found to be in a high global demand, are therefore traded in huge volumes, and currently they are amongst the most expensive timbers in global demand. And we don't believe that this is a reason not to list a species, but rather to have concerns enlisted. We have also heard that the Secretariat has, in its assessment, have found that there is a lack of data, but we would invite everybody to look into the final conclusion of the Secretariat, which came to the conclusion that the listing criteria are met, and they recommend the adoption of the proposal. In addition, what we have heard is there were concerns about the seeds, and I want to say that in the proposal, if you read it, you can read that we included the seeds for precautionary reasons, and in the consultation process we have asked range states for response on this. We didn't receive some. We haven't received any indication today that international trade in seeds is a problem to the species, so I think we are open to delete seeds from the proposed annotation, which would result in annotation 17 then. Regarding the delayed implementation, we have heard concerns from Peru, and we agree and understand that the implementation of such a listing, would it be adopted, would mean quite some work. So, but we have also heard from the UK that they wouldn't like to see it delayed. So maybe something in between we could go with to facilitate the needs of range states. We propose 1 year delay. So So I think I've responded to the major points. I would like to finalize my statement with that we invite, of course, parties to support the proposal with the amendments we have heard right now, and to list all species of the genera Diptrix with annotation 17 on Appendix 2 of the Convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, European Union. I see Guyana. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Since it's the first time Guyana is taking the floor, I wish to congratulate you on your nomination as Chair, and also wish to extend thanks to Panama for being such a gracious host. Guyana does not support this proposal since it is in Guyana there is Diptrix odorata, and even though it is not being harvested or exported extensively, listing it in Appendix 2 could very well diminish interest in buyers and increase the pressure on other prime species. Guyana is committed to ensuring the species is not harvested unsustainably, and for those reasons, Guyana cannot support this.
That was a bit of a surprise, but I assume you had concluded your intervention, Guyana. But you can have the floor again if you hadn't.
Yes, I had concluded.
Thank you. I have no further requests from parties for the floor, so I will invite any interventions from observers. I see. Let's wait and see how many come in. So I would invite WWF. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. As it's the first time that we, WWF, speaks at Committee 1, we'd like to join others in thanking the government of Panama for their warm welcome and the Secretariat for all the work in preparation. In addition, we'd like to congratulate you, Chair, on your election. This is read on behalf of the international law, the species, and WWF. We'd like to thank Colombia, the European Union, and the host country, Panama, for the presentation of this proposal. Given that Diptrix species are intrinsically very slow-growing species, they take up to 177 years to achieve a minimum diameter, and it's a major threat to their survival, and they have a dense and hard wood, which means that they're often in forests. They can be harvested in forests far from the areas of production, and they are one of the species in danger of extinction, such as guacamayas and eagles that search for nesting spaces. We have been following this proposal from the very beginning, and we know it has been minutely studied, and in particular when it comes to 84.2 shows us the information and the most complex aspects of this proposal. There are few concerns which have called into question the merits of listing this. Diptrix alata, migranta, odorata, and oleifera are all considered under Resolution Conf 9.24 Rev CoP19. Along with the rest of the species, they qualify for inclusion in Annex 2B for the reasons of similarity and the inclusion of seeds within the list. We can understand that, and we've heard from a variety of parties who are interested, and we would accept that it could create difficulties to include seeds, but we think the subject should not be an obstacle for the listing of a species that is valued above all for its timber, so we could agree to the removal of seeds from the annotation. We also accept that some range states and consumer states have concerns about the practical aspects of implementation of the listing, and that a delay of 12 months or 24 months has been suggested. On this point, we must be frank and say we'd prefer there to be no delay, and we would highlight the need to monitor trade during that period. So we would
conclude.
Yes.
Where time is limited.
Por lo tanto,
So we call on parties to support the proposal to ensure the future of these magnificent trees that play an essential role in their ecosystems and local culture. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two observers on my list, which I'll give the floor to, and then no others, because we want to bring this to a conclusion before we close. So I will go now to the International Wood Products Association, and then traffic. So please be as brief as you can.
Thank you. As this is our first time speaking before the committee, I would like to join others in thanking Panama for hosting us so graciously and congratulating the chair on his election. I'm making this intervention on behalf of the International Wood Products Association, which represents hundreds of member companies around the world committed to the sustainable sourcing of wood. We are concerned that Proposition 48 does not meet the standard for inclusion in CITES Appendix 2, namely that it cannot be known or inferred or projected that regulation of trade in the species is required to ensure that the harvest of specimens from the wild is not reducing the wild population to a level at which its survival might be threatened by continued harvesting or other influences. We ask that parties consider both the positions of multiple primary exporting parties, including Brazil, Bolivia, and Guyana, who have already spoken so eloquently, which have to date not indicated support for the proposal, as well as the impacts this decision could have on domestic communities, many of them indigenous, in range countries engaged in the sustainable harvest of the species. It's also worth noting that importers in the United States and the European Union, which are the primary export markets for this product, comply with robust laws and enforcement with regards to the importation of timber already. In summary, IWPA does not believe that this proposal should be advanced and would request a vote of no from the parties. If, however, it is adopted, IWPA would strongly recommend a longer implementation period of 24 months, as suggested by Peru, as this will have significant impacts on trade and on the regulatory authorities tasked with implementation. Thank you for allowing us to voice our concerns.
Thank you, International Wood Products Association. I'll give the floor to traffic, and again with a request to be very brief. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is an intervention which is made by Traffic and IUCN. In accordance with our analysis, the main threat that has been identified for Diptrix features is the cutting for timber, and the international trade in this seems to be increasing. Diptrix alata fits with criteria B of Annex 2A of Resolution 9.24. Based on current and historic growth of 30% that has been influenced, a loss of 30% which has been seen with deforestation. It has common names of Komaru and Huaco, and it cannot always be identified at species level in trade. Two species, Diptrix alata and odorata, are often confused with Andoritis tabuiva and Rhododendron, which are mentioned in Proposal 44. So if that proposal were to be agreed, they would also meet the look-alike criteria. Traffic and IUCN consider that annotation 17 that does not include seeds may be more suitable for these species until we have further information and research on seeds in international trade and strategies are developed to mitigate the negative potential impact on livelihoods and their consequences on the conservation of forest coverage in accordance with Resolution 16.6 on CITES and livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Traffic. And that concludes our request from the floor for interventions. So I've listened to the debate carefully. Sorry, I see, is that Brazil? Yes? Do you request the floor again? If you can make it very, very brief, please. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick reaction. We do recognize that the Secretariat recommended the adoption of the proposal, and we were surprised by this, since its own assessment also recognized that there is little information available on the species that supposedly fulfill the requirements to satisfy criterion B of Annex 2A of Resolution COP 9.24 that would justify the adoption of the entire proposal. And I also would like to add that our trade is made with the scientific name of the species. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Your comments noted. So where are we? Well, I certainly haven't heard any consensus in this debate. There have been amendments proposed. If there was any consensus at all, then it did seem that many people that had suggested excluding seeds from the listing proposal and instead using #17 as the annotation if it were to be adopted, and that suggestion was accepted by the EU and its 27 member states as a co-proponent. So there may be some consensus there. We had a suggestion, I think, originally from Peru for a 24-month delay into implementation if this proposal were ultimately adopted. And the EU also then subsequently suggested a shorter period of delay of 12 months. Before I conclude on the best way forward, I would like to go back to, I guess, the lead proponent, Panama, and ask them, having heard the debate, what would they like to do? Without consensus, then the obvious way forward here is for a vote. So I would like to ask you if that's what you would like to do.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. We agree with taking into consideration a deadline for implementation of 18 months for entering into force, so that we can maintain the plan for the annotation. The annotation by consensus. Thank you.
Okay, one moment, please. So they're suggesting #17 plus 18 months. European Union, I see you've requested the floor, and you are a co-proponent, of course.
Thank you, Chair. We propose that the co-proponents get together and discuss how we can come to a solution that might be better to the majority here, and so we would like you to give us some time for that, please.
Okay, European Union, so you are in effect making a kind of motion to suspend the debate, a procedural motion. And of course, I will be willing to consider that if we were coming back to it first thing tomorrow morning, recognizing that we've only got 8 minutes left of today's session anyway. But as a procedural motion, I need to see if there are any objections to that. So does anyone object? We are close to the end of the session in any case. So we could come back to this first thing tomorrow morning. I'm not seeing any requests from the floor, so we suggest we suspend discussions on this topic until tomorrow morning, and to give the co-proponents a chance to discuss amongst themselves and perhaps with other parties that have intervened in this debate to see if they can come up with a way forward. But we'll resume this tomorrow morning then. So I think we don't have any other business that we can fit to the remainder of this session. So we can all have about 8 minutes of our day back to use as you will. But I will say that, I do expect to come back to this first thing tomorrow morning. So one way or the other, we would like to know what the co-proponents want to do, and if they can come up with a suggestion or a way forward where we might find consensus. I will always try to find consensus if I can. So with that, and with no further announcements from the Secretariat, I close this session, and I will see you all tomorrow morning. Thank you. Oh, there's a minute. You've got some comments from the Secretary? Yeah. So Secretariat has an announcement to make.
Thanks, Chair. The Asian region will be meeting tomorrow in the room ISMO 1 tomorrow morning, and I believe the delegation from Indonesia might know the time that meeting starts. Perhaps they can advise us of that, but Asian region meeting tomorrow in ISMO 1 tomorrow morning, and perhaps Indonesia could let us know the start time. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we close the session. So thank you, and have a good evening.